All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about one of the most powerful judicial ideas anywhere in the world, India's basic structure doctrine.
And it all boils down to this one huge question. Can a government actually rewrite its country's soul? I mean, think about that. This question has been at the very heart of this decades-long constitutional fight in India. It's the elected government on one side and the very identity of the nation's founding document on the other. So here's the central conflict, right? On one hand, you've got Parliament, which has the power to amend the Constitution. That makes sense. Laws need to change with the times. But on the other hand, you have the Supreme Court, whose job is to be the ultimate guardian of that same Constitution. So how do you find that balance? How do you let the document breathe and adapt without letting someone gut its core principles?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the initial tug of war, then get to the ultimate showdown. We'll talk about how they drew a line in the sand, what the core pillars of the Constitution are, why this doctrine is such a shield for democracy, and finally, the debate that's still going on today.
All right, let's rewind the clock. We're starting right at the beginning, in the early days of the Indian Republic, because this constitutional tug of war, believe it or not, started almost right away.
Just look at this timeline. You can literally see the back and forth getting more and more intense. In 1951, the Supreme Court basically says, yep, Parliament, you can amend whatever you want, even fundamental rights. They doubled down on that in 65, but then, bam, in 1967, in the Golaknath case, they do a complete 180. They slam on the brakes and say, nope, fundamental rights are off limits. Well, as you can imagine, Parliament didn't take that sitting down. They fired right back with the 24th Amendment, trying to grab that power back. The stage was absolutely set for a massive showdown.
And that simmering conflict, it finally boiled over in 1973. This was the big one. A case that would completely change the game for Indian constitutional law forever.
So the Supreme Court, with this massive 13-judge bench, comes up with this brilliant compromise, the basic structure doctrine. And what it says is, look, Parliament, you can absolutely amend the Constitution, but, and this is a huge but, you cannot destroy its core identity. The analogy I love is this. You can renovate your house, you can paint the walls, you can even knock down a few internal walls, but you cannot, under any circumstances, demolish the foundation. That's the basic structure. And the logic behind it, argued so powerfully by the famous lawyer Nani Pakivala, was actually pretty simple but so profound. He said, Parliament is the creature of the Constitution, not the creator of the Constitution. Get it? The Constitution is supreme. Parliament gets its power from the Constitution, not the other way around. This just set the hierarchy in stone, putting the Constitution right at the very top.
But, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. This new doctrine was immediately put to the test, and it forced the court to get really specific about how it would actually work in the real world.
So in a case called Waman Rao in 1981, the court did something super practical. They set a hard cutoff date, April 24, 1973. That's the day the original judgment came down. And this was a clever move, right? It prevented the country's entire legal history from being thrown into complete chaos.
This is a legal idea called prospective overruling. So there was this thing called the Ninth Schedule, which was kind of like a constitutional safe house. If you put a law in there, it was protected from being challenged in court. The court basically drew a line in the sand. They said, any law put in that safe house before that 1973 cutoff date, it's safe, it's immune. But any law added after that date could be dragged out into the light and checked to see if it damaged the Constitution's basic structure. Pretty smart, right?
Okay, so that brings up the million-dollar question. What are these fundamental features? What exactly makes up this foundational basic structure that Parliament isn't allowed to touch?
Well, here's the thing. There isn't some exhaustive final list written down somewhere. And that's actually intentional. The court has kept it as an evolving concept. But over the years, it has identified several of these core pillars. We're talking about things like the supremacy of the Constitution itself, the separation of powers, judicial review, secularism, and of course, free and fair elections. The absolute non-negotiables, the very bedrock of Indian democracy.
So, why is this doctrine seen as such a critical safeguard for the world's largest democracy? Let's really dig into its impact and its significance.
Okay, first and foremost, it's the ultimate check on power. It makes sure that no single government, no matter how huge its majority is, can use its temporary power to permanently rewrite the fundamental rules of the democratic game just to help themselves out. And this isn't just theory. This doctrine was tested by fire in the Minerva Mills case.
So back in 1976, during a really controversial period in India known as the emergency, the 42nd Amendment was passed. And it basically tried to give Parliament absolute, unlimited power to amend anything. But the Supreme Court stepped in and struck down those parts, declaring that limited government and judicial review are themselves part of the basic structure. You see the genius there? Parliament couldn't use its power to amend to give itself unlimited power. It was a perfect checkmate.
So at the end of the day, the doctrine really is like a constitutional shield. It protects our fundamental rights from being just wiped away, it guarantees that the judiciary stays independent and can hold the government accountable, and most of all, it keeps the Constitution as the supreme guiding star for the entire nation.
But it's not all sunshine and roses. The doctrine has its critics, for sure. And to really get the full picture, we have to look at the arguments against it.
Probably the biggest knock against it is that it's just vague. Because the court has never handed down a final, complete list of what's in the basic structure, it creates a lot of legal uncertainty. And critics say this gives unelected judges way too much power to just interpret things on the fly, on a case-by-case basis.
And that leads right into the other major argument, that this whole doctrine messes with the separation of powers. The critics will tell you that it lets unelected judges veto amendments that were passed by the people's democratically elected representatives. In a way, they say it makes the judiciary like a third house of parliament. It really frames it as a clash between judicial oversight and the will of the people.
Which leaves us with this huge, lingering question, and it's one that goes to the very heart of democracy. Who gets the final say? Should it be the leaders who we elect, or should it be the courts, the guardians of the Constitution? It's a debate that's still raging in India, and frankly in democracies all over the world. So where do you think that right balance is?